Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Rich Lyons. This is the Living After Faith podcast, and we are now the official podcast of RecoveringReligionist.com, and RecoveringReligionist.com is a site started by Dr. Darrell Ray, and what it is, it's a podcast, a location, a website, a combined effort to help people who are doing just that, recovering from religion. And in the process, we're living after faith. And we set up some new email addresses for you. If you want to email myself, it's rich@livingafterfaith.com. If you want to email Deanna Joy, my lovely wife, you can email her at deannajoy@livingafterfaith.com. And we'd also invite you to visit our blog, livingafterfaith.com, and you can find everything we do there. We're also on Facebook at, guess what, Living After Faith. So we're on Twitter, you can find all those links when you go to livingafterfaith.com, Facebook, Twitter, the whole bit, and we're there. Today we have a guest with us. His name is Hank Fox. He is the author of Neck Blue Collar Atheist. For those of you who said, "Oh my God, Rich sounds way too Southern. He sounds like a preacher. He scares me." Hank Fox is also a Texan. Not only is he a Texan, he is a redneck blue-collar atheist. Hello, Hank.
Hello, how are you, Rich?
I am awesome today. Life is awesome. Now, I understand you're actually more than an atheist. You're an anti-theist?
I pronounce it antitheist.
I like that.
Something I came up with a couple of years ago when I realized that, as I explain it, not only do I not believe in gods and all the supernatural stuff, but I don't think you should either.
I like that a lot. The longer I have been out of faith, the more I have realized there is no such thing as a benign faith.
I would definitely agree. I think the kind of mental mechanics that you have to go through to believe in stuff without evidence and even against evidence damages you in some ways. It predisposes you to a lot of other bad things, bad traits of mind, habits of mind.
You were raised in Texas just as I was, so the religious atmosphere, so it just kind of forces you into that mold. And
oh, yes.
You've got a story about how you came out of religion, and we also want to talk about where you are now and talk about your book, because I think it's going to be a fascinating, probably very fun read. First of all, you've lived a pretty plain life, doing things like jumping out of airplanes. Kind of give us a rundown of what life is involved for Hank Fox.
You know, you talk about the highlights of your life, and it all sounds so great, but when you really live it, it's long periods of boredom punctuated by these highlights, such as I've ridden 8 bulls. I hitchhiked around the country more than 26,000 miles. I worked as a real cowboy. I drove draft horses for 8 years professionally. I've been a professional baker. Little stuff like that I like to remember, like feeding marshmallows to a live grizzly, getting bitten by a coyote, a lot of fun stuff, jumping out of planes, all that sort of stuff. But as I say again, in the midst of living it, it's actually pretty boring. It's not that fantastic.
Sounds pretty exciting to me. I, too, have jumped out of airplanes. I have never ridden a bull, nor have I been bitten by a coyote. But I have stepped in plenty of the stuff that bulls leave behind as evidence.
I hear you.
So what led you to leave the good Christian upbringing that you obviously had down there in Texas and kind of bring us up to speed on how it got you where you are?
I got into religion, of course, as most of us do as a child. It was something that my parents did, and the Harvesters Tabernacle Baptist Church was right around the corner. In fact, as a child, I played in their lot. When your grandmother's really religious and everybody around you is, if not very religious, at least accepting of it all, and, you're an uncritical child, you can't help but get all of that stuff into your head. And you grow up, it is a constant part of your thoughts. And I was a reader as a child, and I liked going off by myself and thinking about stuff. And it was along about 13, and I wrote in my journal one day, I don't actually believe in God. And that was fine until my stepfather found it. And oh boy, he tormented me about that for years afterwards. And there was this moment when my grandmother was hanging onto my sleeve and crying and, thinking I was going to hell and all that stuff. And, oh, boy, that's pretty intimidating. You don't have any choice but to live with your own family and your own people. And here in Texas, we had our own little culture, and that's all you know. That's all you've got. And to come out of that takes, I like to hope it's courage, but I think it's just never letting yourself be dishonest with yourself. At some point, even if you're only able to do this stuff in your own head and you don't have anybody to talk to, you can't just accept certain things. You have to question them. And that's what I did. And as I say in the book, it took me a good 20 years after 13 to really work all this stuff out in my head. And most of it was that quiet, just me thinking about it thing. Eventually I got there. And I was aware that I was a complete and total atheist. And when I say that, I mean it was all gone from my head. All the last suspicions that there might be a supernatural super being, looking at my thoughts and watching me and stuff like that. When I finally realized that there was nothing there, that was the moment I think I became an adult, when I became free to be myself and not this other either religious or scared person that all the religious forces want you to be. And then, a few years passed. I was keeping quiet about it. I wasn't really telling anybody. And what do? You're in company with somebody. You're having dinner with them. You're visiting with old friends. And, Jesus comes into the conversation. What are you going to say? Well, I don't believe in that. You keep your mouth shut. You're in their house. It's their hospitality. You keep it to yourself. I think the Internet is going to turn out to be the revolution that changes all that. Certainly that for me. I started arguing online with people in Yahoo chat rooms and things like that. And when you do that, when you're arguing with somebody, two things are happening. One is, hopefully, you're hoping to convince them. The other thing is you're getting practice in thinking about the stuff you're talking about. And after a period of time at that, I got really solid. I really understood the kinds of things that I believed, and that led to here.
Okay, so you were a bit shy, and you come out of religion. Once you finally went public with it, did things happen like you expected, or what happened?
It was unexpected in the sense that it was a big nothing. I announced that to friends. I started talking about it, and I was surprised that I thought there was going to be this great clamor and more tugging at my sleeve and crying and stuff like that, but it was kind of a non-issue. That may be because, my peer group at the time were some fairly bright people. But I wonder if most of us, even if I'd done this when I was in Texas, I live in upstate New York now, by the way, even if I'd done this in Texas, I wonder if most of the people around me would have just said, okay. It felt like it required a great amount of courage to actually make that announcement. But looking back on it, I think I could have just said it, and most people would have said, oh, okay. Anytime you're talking about this kind of thing, there are going to be people around you who are not going to accept it, and no amount of talking could get them to understand what you mean by it.
Right.
But no matter what you're doing, you're going to be dealing with those people.
Right.
So you shouldn't let them make the major decisions of your life about where you want to be in life, what you want to believe in, how you want to think. They're less important, I think, than these other open-minded people.
Something you mentioned earlier that was one of the strong things for me was honesty with yourself. When I realized I could no longer lie to myself about what I believed and had to be totally honest with myself about things, it changed a lot of who I was. Did you find that to be the same thing?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's something that, as a child, nobody ever told me that I could do that I could think anything and it was okay. The stuff that bubbles up in your head when you're a kid, some of it scares you because you've been told to be afraid of it. You've seen the reactions of the people around you. If you come up in your head with the idea that, well, what if there's no God or something like that, it's okay to think that. It's okay to explore that. There's nobody watching. It doesn't mean that you're going to go out and become violent and evil and stuff like that. And in fact, that's one of the concepts that's prevalent in society today that plays into that, is the idea that if there's no God, what keeps you from killing people, or what keeps you from stealing or raping or all that stuff? And the very question, the very concept that if you don't have a God in your head, you will immediately go out and kill somebody is so incredibly offensive, not just to me personally, but to the human species, that it's just vile filth to me.
Do you feel like you're a better person now that you are an atheist?
Sure. Oh, yes. One of the things I say in the book is, if you get gods out of your head and that idea that goodness can only come from God, it doesn't mean you're immoral. It means that your morality becomes more yours. You are responsible. You're the adult in charge for being courteous to people and giving people compliments and being, good to kids and animals and caring about things. That stuff doesn't come from this 50-foot tall guy in the sky. It comes from you, whether you know it or not. And when you cast that 50-foot tall guy in the sky out of your head, you realize that everything having to do with morality and compassion and goodness, it's either you or it's nobody.
I found a lot of the same things when I was coming out of religion. At first, I thought I was the most evil a human could get, because the way I was raised, someone who doesn't believe in God, that is, you're an unbeliever. That's as evil as a person gets. And then I realized there are injustices in the world that are taking place that all my life I have watched happen and thought, in the end, God would make it right. I think one of the most startling things I discovered was God's not going to make it right. So it's up to us to do it.
Exactly. I have a good little side story about that. I was reading a book about Darwin's voyage, And there was a little side story in there about some missionaries who had gathered up money and supplies and stuff in England, and they were going down to minister to the heathens in Tierra del Fuego. And they got down there in this big ship, and they were led off in 3 boats, one of which had most of the people in it, and the other 2 had all their supplies. They got into some heavy water, and the 2 boats with the supplies sank. So here they are on the beach with nothing, and it's, pretty harsh weather. They sat there on the beach, and one of them was keeping notes, and they thought God was testing their faith, and that the thing that they needed to do was to sit there on the beach and wait for him to rescue them. And they died. And at the same time, on a nearby island, there were some shipwrecked sailors, and they set about building shelters and finding food and starting fires and all that stuff. And when they were rescued a year later, they were actually in better health than the sailors on the ship that rescued them. So it's an example of doing for yourself, thinking for yourself, and being deluded into thinking that, God is going to come to your rescue if you just sit there patiently.
And it's not going to get fixed. And that's one of the things I like to talk to people about on Living After Faith is your life's the same way. You have to take responsibility at some point and say, I'm going to fix this.
Yeah, exactly. Everything in your life is like that. It's either you doing it or, some real person helping out, or it ain't getting done. And, as we all know, things only get better by you working at them. That's the only way.
But there's also at the same time something empowering about realizing that there's also no heavenly curse upon me, that there's no predetermined destiny that I cannot excel above. When you realize that what I do, what I create, what I make is what I can create and what I can make, it's kind of liberating, or at least I found it that way.
It's absolutely liberating. I say in the book that the real truth about the world, we were taught as children that there are all these mysteries and that, whatever sort of church you went to, there's God back there hidden, there's Satan, there's demons, there's witches, there's all this stuff. But in fact, there's none of that stuff. The world is as we see it. There are things that we don't know, but nothing is deliberately hidden. It's not this desperate puzzle that we can only work out with the help of the Pope or some sort of spiritual leader or the local psychic. It's all open and free. There's nothing man was not meant to know. And once you realize that, oh boy, is that freedom that you've never felt before. You go out there and there aren't these secret forces working in the background to mess you up. There's just reality. And we've lived with reality as a species for 20,000, 50,000 years, whatever, and all that time before, the billions of years. So we can do it. It's okay. We can run our lives and do well.
Now, when I click on Amazon.com and I search for Hank Fox, Redneck Blue Collar Atheist, and the man in brown shows up at my house, knocks on the door, has me sign it. I come in, I rip open the envelope, trying to be real careful not to rip the book as well. What am I going to find when I finally peel it open?
It's a trade paperback. It's about 300 pages. It's got a picture on the cover of me riding a bull back when I was in my 20s and when I was foolish. And it's 24 chapters. What I try to do in all of this, there's this idea that we want everything in the world to be simple. We want it to be, simple dichotomies, white-black dichotomies, and something that will fit on a bumper sticker. But the real world is quite a bit more complex than that. A lot of times, to understand something, you have to take a journey. If a guy walked up to me right now and said, I'm an expert in calculus, I can't just say, well, explain calculus to me. Tell me what it's about. Because he can't do it. I have to take the journey of calculus. I have to start in the beginning, and, some teacher has got to carry me along this way until I understand it. So the world is complex. However, there are easy ways to slide into it, and the way I found to do that is with metaphors. So when I talk about Batman or M&Ms or dogs and trains or mountain creeks or logging camps or whatever, I wanted to first get the reader to understand, here's something simple, here's something that's familiar from your own life, and then take this journey into this more complex issue. The truth about atheism and about religion is that it probably has a bit of a intellectual image, in the public mind, that, you have to be Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens or somebody with a PhD to understand it, but it's not. And that's the whole idea of the book, the redneck blue collar me. Just this dumb, ordinary guy can understand this stuff. Because what is religion? It's not this massive, complex thing you need to go to college for 8 years to learn about. It's something very simple. And it's so easy to get out of that unassisted teenagers can't escape from it on their own, in their own mind, because that's what I did. I know a lot of people, other people who did that. Religion is actually rather fragile in some ways, I think. And if you don't keep getting that reinforcement from the people around you or your church or whatever, it starts to decay. You start to ask questions. And there's the real world, which is this huge, wonderful place. And then there's this little box where religion happens. Whatever sect or church you belong to, they've got their little box of beliefs, and it's all happening in their heads. Outside of that box is reality and the universe and all the other people around you with other religions and with no religion at all. And you don't have to live in that box. That's the basic idea. And to get out of it is not really all that hard.
You mentioned that religion is fragile. I remember when I was coming out, I was dating a Christian girl, and I had serious questions. And she said to me, "Your questions shatter my faith." And my answer to her was, if my questions shatter your faith is pretty fragile.
Yeah.
And the more I hear, the more I realize a lot of religious people are afraid of atheists. They're afraid of us. And I think it's because they're afraid we're going to do just that. We're going to shatter their faith or, as Daniel Dennett says, break their spell.
Once you have that in your head, it's a particular way of thinking. And like I say, it's reinforced by everything around you if you're in that type of culture. You literally can't imagine anything else. And if there's no such thing as God, what keeps you from murdering people? That question is that kind of thing. The person asking that is not just asking that to disturb you personally. They're asking that because they don't know. They have no idea what keeps you from killing people. And as I said earlier, that question is so offensive, not just to me, but to the human species, because it basically says that human beings have no compassion. They have no capacity for joy or understanding or caring outside that person's religion, outside of their little belief in their particular God. And that's not the case. There's any number of atheists and agnostics and humanists and unbelievers who are wonderful people. And, if that's true, then it means that wonderfulness, that kindness, caring, etc., doesn't come from that particular church's God. It's innate to human beings. We're prone to compassion. We're prone to neighborliness. We're prone to, saying hello to strangers and waving and giving people compliments. That's part of our nature. That doesn't come from God. That's us. And like I said, the person that asked that, if you don't have God, what keeps you from killing people? They don't understand that. They literally don't know that there's goodness in us just from being human beings. The tragedy of all that is that here's this interest group, the churches or some particular religious order, who have convinced people that they cannot survive, they can't be good without this particular message in their heads. And that's nasty. They've found a way to become parasites on people's natural goodness and convince people that you can't be good, nobody can be good, unless you believe in our thing.
I think a lot of it is they've never seen themselves through honest eyes. They've only seen themselves through the eyes of the God they created or that was created for them. And because of that, they see themselves as evil, horrible. I mean, the Bible tells you there's no goodness inside of man. So because of that, many religions, many Christian religions preach that people are just inherently evil. And when you have that self-image, the goodness you do, you credit that to God. The bad things you take blame for, so it reinforces continuously this idea that I'm horrible, bad, and terrible. But once you break out of that religious mindset and you realize the good things I do are who I am, and when I mess up and do something wrong or do something bad, that's also who I am. But by far and large, you look at yourself and you're doing things that are actually more of a benefit to humanity and certainly not hurting anyone. So when you look at that and see yourself through those eyes, I find it very encouraging. I like the fact that if I want to do something to help somebody, I am empowered to do it. Every bit of good I've ever done in my life, I did. No one else did that. It was me.
That's exactly right. The goodness that you do, not only are you capable of it, and not only does it feel good, but it becomes more yours. You understand that this is me doing this. I'm capable of doing this. For me, that was a profound realization.
We're speaking today with Hank Fox. He's the author of Neck Blue Collar Atheist. And Hank, tell us where we can get your book.
It is available available on Amazon.com. The best place to go is to HankFoxBooks.com, and it describes the book briefly, and you get to see the cover. There's a link there to the Amazon page where you can order it.
Thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm Rich Lyons. This is the Living After Faith podcast. We're now the official podcast of RecoveringReligionist.com. You can see us on Facebook at Living After Faith or check us out at livingafterfaith.com. I'm Rich Lyons. Come laugh with me.